So what we're doing here today is we'll be finishing this walnut slab with our super duper oil, and we'll be using the super duper oil only on the rough edges on this bark, on this live edge, and Catalina will be doing that with the brush. And as you can see, the super duper oil is a much thinner oil than the regular Odie's oil. And then while she's doing that, I'll be doing the top of the table with our regular Odie's oil. So she'll be using the super duper oil for the bark edges with a brush, and then I'll be finishing the top with the regular Odie's oil. And my tool today of choice to apply the finish on the top is a gray pad, a non-woven gray pad. Now I sanded this top to 600 grit, and I chose our microfine gray pads because the microfine gray pad is rated about 800 to 1000 grit. So this will not leave any scratches on the surface. So Catalina, you go ahead and start doing the bark edge, and you can show our viewers on how that works. And Odie's oil is very thick, for those of you new to it, until you stir it. You start stirring it. The regular Odie's oil will start thinning out. You'll get like a consistency of a honey. So make sure you always stir it up so that all the ingredients are emulsified. And the oil that Catalina has is a much thinner version, and that one you can just shake up or stir it as well. So with Odie's oil, a little goes a long way. Now what I'm going to do is going to get my applicator pad good and saturated first, and by doing that it'll get me started, and I'll be able to take this oil and spread it out over the whole table. Now these nice applicator blocks that we sell on our website, you can find them on our website, it makes the job much easier. A beautiful figure coming out in this slab. To get an amazing Odie's oil finish, it's quite simple. You just need a properly prepared surface and an applicator pad to wipe it on, and you're going to have a fantastic finish. And then you finally just buff it off in the final steps. So I'm going to continue to show you how this is done. How you doing there, Catalina?
Good. Dancing.
Now applying the oil on the live edge with the super duper oil is very easy. And the buff off is quite simple. You know, we'll show you that afterwards. You just basically take a cotton towel and you'll basically be blotting it off in those bark edges or those rough live edges. quite simple. It's nothing you need to overthink, and very easy to do. Now this bark edge up on the surface, on the top, I may have her hit that with super duper oil because the bark is very porous. And it's going to take the finish a little differently than the top. So I'm going to want that to really sink in. But we'll look at it afterwards and we'll decide how we're going to finish those last. Now the oil is affected by temperature. It is cool in here today. It's actually a pretty cool day today, and it's cool in this building. So the oil is very thick, but it really doesn't hurt anything. It just makes it a little more difficult to apply sometimes when it's very thick, like this, when it's cold. Other than that, it'll apply very nicely, and there won't be any issues with it. I finished at temperatures as low as 18 degrees in my shop with no problems. Humidity is where you might run into some issues. High humidity makes the finish cure slower, but it's still no problem. You can finish when it's 90% humidity, not an issue. It just will slow the cure time. The drier the weather, the faster the finish will cure. But this is looking beautiful. And if you're new to Odie's, there's no need to use, and I really don't advise to use a power tool. If you're new to Odie's, I advise you to start with an applicator block like this and do it by hand, not hard. This is a pretty large, good-sized table, and I'm pretty much done already. I just have the small section here to do, and then the rest will be just me spreading out the oil and working it in a little further. If you start with a power tool when you're new to our product, you're not going to get the feel of it. So it's always best to start by hand and do at least a half a dozen to a dozen pieces by hand. And then once you understand how the oil reacts and the properties of the product, then you can start graduating into power tools for your application. But I've been doing this for 40 years, over 40 years, 40 plus years, and my application preference is still by hand. Unless I'm doing a really large surface like a floor, or a giant conference table or something like that. Okay, now that I got all the finish applied on the table, I'm going to continue buffing it into the surface, or working it into the surface with the non-woven pad. And the more you work it in, the deeper it's going to get into the wood, and the more beautiful the piece is going to get. It's going to bring out that natural depth and chatoyance in the surface. So basically what I'm doing, the friction of the gray pad gliding over the surface of the wood is causing heat. It's activating those molecules in the wood and the molecules in the finish. They begin to glide and they begin to cross. And that's the beneficial part of working it in and taking your time and getting it into the surface. This piece is looking beautiful. What beautiful color. How you doing, Catalina?
Good. Thank you.
And not difficult. Even the live edge, not that difficult. I have a lot of people ask, how do you do it on the live edge? How do you do it on the bark? I got a rough carving, I got an intricate carving, and very simple. Use the thinner oil, the super duper oil, apply it with a brush. The other reason I like doing it by hand is I get to really see what's going on here. And I get to really spend time in the different areas and work it in, and I'm not in a big rush. And I can literally watch the slab change color before my eyes, bringing that beautiful, that natural depth and beauty out of the wood. Yes, Catalina, I'd like you to hit all the bark edges on the top, all the way around, so it really brings out that black and that rich color of that walnut bark. And you know what? You can get this right here too, just like here. Beautiful.
You want to put the formulations here?
Yes. All the edges, Catalina, and all the bark. Okay? Okay, now that I got the whole top area done, I'm gonna hit this area with Catalina, put it on the bark. Did you get down here, Catalina? I don't think you did.
No, definitely.
Why don't you get that for me real quick? And what I'm going to do now is just let it set up, and then I'll do the final buff off. And it's always best to wait about 45 minutes or more for the finish to set up. Now, you can buff it off sooner, but why be in a rush? It's always better to let it set up, and it lets the oil soak in deep, and it also gives this oil a chance to start to polymerize and tack up. And once it starts to polymerize and tack up, and you're able to buff it off afterwards, what happens is it's kind of like, if those of you have used a wax before to wax a car, you wait for that wax to start to tack up, so then when you buff it off, it really just shines it, and just grabs, and it really gives a beautiful sheen and a really nice build. There's a little spot right there that I missed. So like I said, I'm going to let this set up, and then come back and do the buff off. And especially the areas where she did the bark is very soft and porous, and that's going to really start to absorb all that oil in. And the longer I wait, the less I'll have to buff it off. Don't wait more than 8 hours, 9 hours. If you wait in the 8 to 12 hour range, that's when it starts getting too tacky, and it's more difficult to take off. If you wait a day, you're in a lot of trouble. So if you wait any more than 8 to 12 hours, what you're going to want to do is add another coat of oil on to loosen up the previous coat, and then you'll be able to buff it off easily. But if I buff this off within the next hour or two, I'll easily be able to get it all off, and it'll look fantastic. This is going to be a beautiful table. And after she's done with the edges, we're going to work on the base. And you can use the same finish on the cast iron base as you did on the top or the edges. And today what we're going to do, instead of using the regular Odie's oil on the base, we're going to just use the Super Duper oil, because this base has a lot of intricacies and a lot of detail. It's a cast iron base, and the casting had all kinds of scrolls and curves in it, and it'll be just much easier to brush it on and wipe it off. And that'll bring back that beautiful rich black color, and we'll show you that in the next cut. Okay, okay.
We're using Super Duper oil with a brush, with the thinner formulation. I'm gonna start finishing these iron press legs, right?
Yes, Catalina's going to finish these cast iron legs with the Super Duper oil and a brush. And it'll bring back the life to these legs. These are old, they were beat up. We found them in an old restaurant they were demoing and demolishing. And we were lucky enough to acquire them. And they're quite nice. They're not expensive. You can find legs like this online on most websites. I think the shipping is going to cost you more than the leg because they're so heavy. But this oil is going to make them look beautiful once again. Yeah, get them good and coated, Catalina. Hit every surface on it. And then when you're done, I'm going to go back and buff it off. And I'll continue to work on this. No. Just with the brush, and when you're done with that, you can do the other one and I'll buff this one off. And on the legs, you don't have to wait. So on the cast iron, I advise not to wait long. You just put it on and immediately buff it off. Look how nice it brought that color back. Odie's oil is truly a multi-surface finish. It can be used on leather, it can be used on plastic, it can be used on steel, it can be used on paint, it can be used on cast iron, it can be used on concrete. In the future we'll be polishing these concrete floors. That's great. I think that's plenty. And you can start on the next leg, and I'm going to go ahead and buff it off. Not hard to do. You don't need a power buffer, especially in a situation like this. Never want to use a power buffer to buff off a piece of furniture until you know you've got all the residual oil off the surface. And I'll explain that when we buff off the top. And as you can see, I'm not even concerned about the dirt and dust on the tarp. It's not going to hurt this surface. Now, I don't want to put dirt and dust on the top because I don't want to scratch the surface. But on the cast iron, it's not an issue. It's not going to stick to it. The Odie's oil will let it go once we buff off all the excess oil. These things look like new. That's fantastic. Now we should have did these legs before we put them on the table, but we kind of wanted to show the whole thing together. So, and this is a good opportunity to show if you have a table that's already got legs on it that are looking pretty gnarly and you don't want to take them off. It's just simple. It's a simple cleaning and buffing it on, working it into the surface.
Don't have to worry that you're gonna mistake like with paint, right? So
And that leg is done.
yeah.
Okay, so now we have a properly finished surface. We worked the oil into the surface. We waited about 45 minutes. And now we're going to use a cotton terry towel to buff the surface clean of all the Odie's, excess Odie's oil. And when I mean buff it clean, I'm going to wipe every last bit of oil off this surface. Counter to what you may think to do. We're literally going to take all the finish off the surface. Only what's left inside the wood that's bonded and cross-linked and molecularly bonded to the wood fiber that's inside the wood is staying. Nothing on the surface. If you leave any finish on the surface, you won't get a proper finish. And in about 2 weeks' time, it'll look dry, dull, and lifeless. You'll actually have too much finish on it. It literally is the equivalent of leaving wax on a car. So I'm going to take this, in the beginning of my buff off, I'm going to go in the direction of the slab. And it's the best way to get all the excess oil off the surface in the beginning. And that's because these terry knots in here, these little terries in this towel, are going and digging into the grain and removing the oil out of the grain as well. And I'm not losing sheen, I'm actually getting a higher sheen now. And as my towel loads up with oil, I will flip it over and use the dry side to ensure I get all the oil off. See the oil coming off on the towel? No, this side is clean. Quite simple. Now my surface is beginning to be like very, very slick and smooth. And if you see it on the B camera, you can see that surface is just getting better and better. Now I got all the excess off the surface. Now the rest of this is literally ensuring I got every last bit off. And this is really the buffing part. And once you got your towel completely loaded up, go to the clean side again. It's not a big towel. And if you're a woodworker, you can handle this. I mean, this is not the most laborsome thing you're going to do in the wood shop. It's probably the simplest thing you can do at the wood shop. It doesn't take a whole lot of skill. You don't have to worry about sawdust in the air, special protection because you're using a toxic finish. And look at the sheen on this thing. And now, for those of you that insist on using a machine, I really don't recommend it. But if you're going to use a machine, this is when you can do it. After you got all the excess oil off the surface. It's pretty much, look at that clean side of the towel. See, they got a little spot there where it stopped, right? That means they got a little extra oil there. This is where you can use your buffer after you got all the oil off, just to polish it out and ensure you got the every last bit up. And that's it. There's nothing wrong with obsessing over it. And you can come back an hour later or 2 hours later if you feel like you might want to buff a little bit more off just to ensure you got it all off. You can come back and do it again. And it should look fantastic. And that's pretty much it. I can run my fingers over it. I'm not making any fingerprints. So I run my fingers across, there's no lines. And I wish you all could feel this surface. It's fantastic. What a beautiful silky feeling. And this piece really is ready to be used tomorrow. Now the only thing I would say is don't allow standing water to sit on it for about 3 to 5 days. But even in that case, if you did get it wet, it's really not going to hurt if you did the finish right. If you leave oil on the surface and didn't buff it off and got water on it, then you might have an issue where you get a water spot. But in any case, it's easy to fix. Wipe a little bit more oil and it'll get off. It'll come right off. But if you did it right, nothing will ever hurt this finish. Water won't hurt it, grape juice won't hurt it, wine won't hurt it, acetone won't hurt it, lacquer thinner won't hurt it. It'll be impervious to anything.